I got to say that actually the news today just had me shaking my head because you've noticed for the longest time that Donald Trump and South Africa haven't really been getting on very well. And now we've got this latest arrival of Palestinian refugees. And it was bound to happen that the United States would look at this and just go like, what the hell's going on over there? That's exactly what happened. But before we get on to the main video of today, can you just again remind you, if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button. Really does help. And if you really want to support me, just like share this video around your friends. That would be great. So what actually happened? Well, Donald Trump actually noticed that we got a boatload of, Palestinian refugees. In fact, you can watch that right here.
Are you aware of relocation flights to South Africa that are taking place right now?
Which flights?
There are relocation flights that are taking place. Some Palestinians are being charged up to $2,000 a seat.
I'm not going to South Africa for the G20 because I think their policies on the extermination of people are unacceptable. So I'm not going. So I won't refer to anything having to do with South Africa. South Africa has behaved extremely badly. But I will say that when you look at the F-35 and you're asking me, is it the same? I think it's going to be pretty similar, yeah.
How will that
This
affect?
is a great ally, and Israel's a great ally.
Now, I've got to say, I'm starting to find the entire story just puzzling because we heard, if you remember, the original story was that they came to South Africa, they didn't have any paperwork, and they didn't know why they were here. Apparently, they were refugees, but they didn't want to apply as refugees, and then they were allowed in the country after the gift of the giver said they could come in. Well, according to an expert, the South African government's basically just aided in human trafficking because they've been allowed in, they shouldn't have been. In fact, you can actually watch an immigration lawyer and exactly what he had to say right here.
The advanced passengers manifest, which they had to have done with the landing with the airport. We also know that first flight that landed on the 28th of October, it's alleged that those passengers also did not have an exit stamp from the country that they were coming from. What would you then deduce the situation to have been? Did South Africa really not know that these flights were coming into the country?
Well, I think South Africa knew the flights were coming into the country. And the first one might have been a test because these people say, they give a very harrowing story of how, they had to leave and go to apparently a military air base to be flown out of Ramon. I'm not sure if that's correct. And then from Ramon onwards to Nairobi, and from Nairobi to SA. But it's really not really a mystery. I think there's a lot of cover-up going on, and I don't know who's doing the cover-up. But certainly the fact that there was a previous flight and they were admitted as visitors for 90 days, well, that was the trial and test run. So we would have been prepared. We would have known, as we know from visitors from all over the world, whether any country gives a physical exit stamp or there's a digital exit stamp. In South Africa, when you land here, they give you a physical entry stamp and exit stamp. As we know, the Border Management Agency has upgraded those to prevent fraud, etc. So we know exactly from the stamp when you arrived and who was authorized to let you into the country. So I think it begs the question, how can it be that the authorities should know that there's no physical exit stamp given by A, B, and C countries, and not demand that as a means of entry into the Republic?
Right.
So one of the things that you have to have is a valid passport. The second is only if you're suspicious about the activity or the visitor coming in, would you ask for, say, example, proof of funds, a return ticket. Let's see where you accommodated. So obviously, again, it being very unusual, it was also unusual for us that to observe the activities of how the authorities dealt with these people. I mean,
So the initial news is that these people were allowed into the country without any formal documentation. And if you recall, many of them said they didn't even know they were coming here. In fact, one of the reasons they didn't want to apply for asylum is because they thought their passports would get taken away, typical kind of process. They didn't actually want to be in South Africa. Now, this is becoming really odd because in an interview with one of the individuals, he actually directly cites that he chose to come to South Africa. So this is basically diminishing that whole allegation that they didn't know where they were going, they just landed up here. According to these individuals, well, they actually knew they were coming here. In fact, they picked coming here. In fact, you can watch that right here.
Did you consciously choose to come to South Africa? Were there any other option countries that you would have maybe wanted to come, or you saw the support coming out of here and you're like, that's the perfect place?
No, South of Africa, it was one of the closest countries for Palestine. We have similar issues and cases we fight for, and we both fight against the injustice and the discrimination and the occupations, and all of these are we are sharing the same principles and values. So this is the first one. The second one, South Africa was one of the first countries that recognized Palestine in the United Nations Assembly as well as whom they have been issued Security Council asking for stopping this genocide and criminalizing Israel as a war criminal. These all of things we didn't touch it from closest countries and near countries, but we found it from South Africa. So this the second point lead me to simply decide to go for South Africa.
So the question then is, if you chose to come here and this was a destination that you chose, were you forced to go to a country, remember, forced to go to a country that you didn't know you were going to? Or did you go without any documentation, any formal documentation, and the government bypassed immigration laws in order to allow you in? Well, that's actually the allegation made by the African Christian Democratic Party, also known as the ACDP. They made the allegation that these individuals knew they were coming. South Africa prepared 0 bits of the documentation. We didn't prepare it, and we just allowed them in. We broke our own laws effectively to allow foreign immigrants into the country when we shouldn't have. Now, this is curious because according to Fikile Mbalula, that's exactly what we did, but we did it because we're signatories to the Geneva Convention, and so it's our role to assist asylum seekers. Now, he says that the ANC doesn't deal with national security, even though it's in government. And the ANC keep doing this. They keep talking as if somehow they're not in government and they're not responsible for the failures of the state, even though they are in government and they are very much responsible for the failures of the state. And he says that effectively it was Leon Schreiber's fault because somehow Leon Schreiber just didn't deal with it properly, and that it was his failing because it's an immigration issue. That's a home affair issue. So it's not the ANC's fault, but they wanted the immigrants in because, Geneva Convention. But then that also became curious because then Ronald Lamola went up and said, actually, they don't want the Palestinians in. He says that there's something shady going on and that the individuals came by plane. They weren't supposed to have come here. And so he wants that to be thoroughly investigated in order for them to determine why they came here. But they want them here, but they don't want them here. Can you see how this is becoming like doublespeak? Everything the ANC is saying just makes no sense. Now you may say to us, okay, well, maybe this is all just a ploy of the gift of the givers. And I would actually grant that to you. I wonder what the role of the gift of the givers is. Because Soliman, as of today, had a nice big meeting with the ANC where they discussed and they collaborated on the arrival of Palestinians and their shared commitment to humanitarian support and international solidarity, free Palestine, and they're going to work together on this. So the ANC knew nothing about this, even though the individuals chose to come here, and the ANC wants them here, but they don't want them here. This is becoming really curious. It's Leon Schreiber's job, but the ANC want them here, and they don't care what Leon Schreiber's doing. The level of doublespeak here is just off the charts. Now, on the same day, the founder of the Gift of the Givers, Soliman, he went to the EFF, and they also had a little area of discussion around how they can collaborate and continue to work together in #Free Palestine, I suppose. And it's curious, why did he go meet the EFF? Well, don't forget that Soliman was very unhappy that the EFF and the MK party were not included in the GNU because he's a big fan. So don't forget that. Now, news has come out that apparently the organization that's responsible for this is apparently, accordingly, coordinating with the Israeli government, and now it's a Mossad plant. And so the allegation came in that effectively this company is linked to an IDF officer, and apparently this IDF officer is working with the Israeli government, even though it's a private company. We need to first talk about the idea that he's an IDF officer. It's important to understand everyone in Israel is an IDF officer. So when you chant death to the IDF, you basically mean death to everyone in Israel because they have compulsory service, compulsory military service. And if you don't go to the compulsory military service, you don't get a certificate of service. No certificate of service, can't get a job. Can't get a job. So after school, you have to go to the IDF. Whether you want to or not, you are going. It's national compulsory service. So everyone's an IDF member. So what does that mean? Does that mean that everyone who commits a crime in Israel or does something they shouldn't do, does that mean it's linked to the Israeli government because they were former members of the IDF? Like, if you think that, you're a retard. Like, everyone is a member of the IDF. And that's really, really important to note. That's also important to note that Solomon can kind of claim like this is some kind of conspiracy theory going on in Israel. But he already brought Gazans here. He's been doing it since 2024. This is not new. And so the idea now that there's this new IDF-linked officer and somehow it's an Israeli-Estonian. It's dual national. He's half Estonian, half Israeli, and he's living supposedly in Israel and supposedly has a connection to the company. Not really sure on that at this point in time. So I just want to be clear, I don't know. This isn't me saying that he's not involved. It's not me saying that he is. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But the reality is, you can't say that this was just suddenly a ploy that just happened. If it was something that just happened, how come the gift of the givers has already facilitated the importation of Gazans before? Isn't that weird? But in any case, this company, so Mossad, apparently is being accused of being secretly tied to Israel or Mossad. I mean, it must always be Mossad or Israel. Because apparently this is all part of the Israeli plan to depopulate Gaza through voluntary migration. But you got to understand that word, voluntary migration. These individuals who are going like, guys, we just don't want to live here. Like, there are better places to live. We just want to get out the country. Just, we'll pay you whatever you want. Just let us go. Now, Mossad has strongly denied any form of connections to Israel. And they say that the only contact that they actually have with Israel is through mandatory security coordination, which is required for anybody that's leaving Gaza. They say that it's these individuals are paying significant fees. Apparently, they don't even know, in some instances, their final destination. They just want out. And they want out because what they are describing as Hamas, they're just saying they just don't want to live there. They're saying that the war and things that are going on there, it's just not great. So, like, if the war stopped tomorrow, Hamas is still in charge. These individuals may still want to leave. So you can't say, well, Israel's making it unbearable for them to live there. Hamas is making it unbearable for them to live there. And even without Israel, probably still want to leave. I mean, I would want to live under Hamas. So the allegations are kind of true. But you have to ask yourself a question, like, what exactly is being imported? We got a large amount of these individuals supposedly being depopulated and going through to various areas. But it's interesting to note that, like, these individuals are fleeing war. Now, what happened in Syria? Like, Syria had all forms of civil war and thousands of people left Syria. That wasn't de-Syrianizing Syria, was it? Like, people always flee a war zone. Sometimes they flee their government. Remember that the majority of the reason why people left Syria is because of Assad. They didn't want to live under him. And so they left. Now, many of these individuals don't want to live under Hamas. But it's somehow Israel's fault. I don't know. It's weird. Because there's another way to frame this. And that is, let us not forget that Solomon himself actually contested elections underneath the Muslim party. Remember the Muslim party that apparently wanted forms the Sharia in South Africa. Like, Solomon's a committed Muslim. Don't forget that. Like, this is a guy who really would love to see South Africa as an Islamic caliphate. But we have to ask ourselves questions like, what actually happens when you have a large-scale importation of Muslims into a Christian country? Do they just assume the culture and get on with it? And to that, I would give you a form of reference. And I'm going to give you Germany. Because in Germany, they currently got Christmas markets because Christmas is coming up. And at this Christmas market, and Muslims went to it and chanted, "There is no God but Allah, Allah Akbar." In fact, you can actually watch this right here. Now, as that went on, it just got like progressively worse throughout the day. And then it started going through to "There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger." And it just kind of got more and more, shall we say, assertive. In fact, you can actually see how it escalated throughout the day, right here. Now, there's something really interesting about this exact event that occurred in Germany. And I want to show you the clip, and then I'll comment on it. In fact, have a watch. So you notice how the Muslims are getting rather, should we say, vocal in Germany with the local Christians. Did you notice all the Palestinian protests? Did you notice in that last clip, South African flag? South African flag with the Palestinian flags. What do you think this is going to tell the world about South Africa? Is it saying, wow, South Africa's on the right side of history? Or should we also notice that Germany actually has some very interesting stats? Let's just keep it to Germany, because Germany has had a large importation of Muslims from the third world. Well, in any case, in 2024, Germany had 2,211 anti-Christian offenses, including vandalism, violence, and attacks on individuals that had risen from 232 to 274. Now, Germany logged 337 anti-Christian crimes, a 22% increase. No wonder who they came from. And this also led to numerous arson attacks on churches. And everybody's noticing there's this sharp rise of intolerance towards Christians in Germany, a growing hostility targeting churches and religious communities. And they're all from the same individuals, all from the same areas. And that's what South Africa is importing via the ANC and the gift of the givers. And you need to be aware of that, because the consequences of that are not great. Now, in other news, if you watched my video from yesterday, you'll know that the US criticized the G20 and said that it was essentially now the G100 because apparently South Africa just invited everybody. Well, Cyril hit back today and said that actually he was praising South Africa's approach, so his own approach, this is him praising himself, and he said that it was inclusive and Africa-centered and representative of the Global South's priorities. In fact, you can watch that video clip right here.
Many of you gathered here have made significant contributions to the B20 deliberations during our G20 presidency. And I've seen that as a great contribution. And it hasn't only been the B20. We are actually president of a very unique G20 process, much as it isn't much appreciated elsewhere in the world, where it is said that we are convening a B100, a G100 summit. But we are convening an inclusive summit.
It's really weird the way that Cyril frames this. It's almost forms of self-aggrandizing. He says, I'm not great because look what I did. I'm wonderful. Now, 42 countries have confirmed attendance at the summit. And as you know, the US will take over next month, but Donald Trump has ordered that no US officials will attend the South African summit, citing South Africa's unacceptable human rights behavior. Specifically, what he described as policies of extermination and the condemnation of refugee flights arriving from Gaza. Well, that's a new one, right? Now he's condemning the flights from Gaza, the story we just covered, but also the policies of extermination, which we've discussed tons, so let's not go over that again. But despite all of this, they just had a G20 summit today, a business one, and the US presence at it was rather strong. So the US is attending, but it's not attending. Like, I'm not following. So Trump has banned the US government officials from attending the G20's Leaders Summit, but the US academics and business leaders flooded the B20 Business Summit. Yeah, this is making a lot of sense. So this has led the former finance minister, Trevor Manuel, to criticize Trump's approach and saying that the post-World War II global order is broken. And he's saying it's worsening under the current US leadership, specifically Donald Trump. And he warned that excluding countries like South Africa undermines international respect, predictability, and global cooperation. He says, with the US absent, South Africa faces the awkward symbolism of handing the G20 presidency over to an empty chair. And I discussed that in the last couple of days. Now, Manuel called for renewed global leadership, coordinated reform, all in an effort to stabilize international governance structures. This is the usual just claptrap that they say, or just help us out to reform the global institutions. But this is what they don't understand. Trump doesn't want to be a globalist. He's not keen. So he's not doing it. So in any case, that's the G20 in a nutshell. G20 is really not going that well at the moment. But this whole story with the Palestinian refugees is just, I don't understand what's going on here. The stories are just not making any sense. Every day they are just not making any sense. And the ANC isn't making this make any more sense. It's so insidious. And it has real impacts on the future of the country. And it has an impact on you and me and how our country actually continues to go forward. To a degree, it could be worse even than the ANC. Let us not forget that even in Ireland, the Protestants and the Catholics fought against each other for years. You insert Islamism into there and all of a sudden they had something both to unite on and fight against, because Islamism was a bigger threat to them than any of their internal policies before. And this arguably could be the catalyst that we have in South Africa. It's curious. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. In any case, until tomorrow, bye.